So, as I understand it, there are two questions before us. One question is how can Occidental people in Occidental culture, uh, how can they relate or can they relate at all to the Hindu concept of many, many forms of the one reality, unfortunately labeled gods and goddesses? And is it necessary? And then the second question, which really came first, was can we say a little bit about Buddhism and how possibly it relates to Vedanta, and why, I would add a subsidiary question, why might it be more popular, as it were, than Vedanta? I'll answer that question first. First of all, we have to understand that Vedanta is a system which is universal. It applies to Buddhism, it applies to Christianity, whatever ism is there, it applies to. Because it is, as it says it is, that is, it is the foundation of truth. And so we claim that we have the truth. All religion seems to originate from one simple question related to our own experience. Because many people will think that religion is a way of answering questions about the universe which science now today can answer. But that wouldn't really be accurate, because our common experience is not about scientific questions. More significant to us personally would be the question of death. And as long as a human has been there, they'll notice, somebody was here, now they're gone, we don't feel very happy about it. And naturally a question arises, where have they gone? Perhaps they haven't gone anywhere. Perhaps their whole existence is just permanently snuffed out. A kind of nihilistic position. In other words, material is there, there's birth, there's life, there's death, and that's the end. A kind of linear position, born in one point in time, and dying at one point in time, and in between a kind of space. And during that period, that interval, it's like watching a movie. There's a starting position, no doubt. There's an ending position, no doubt. But what's in between, we don't worry about the beginning or the end. We simply carry on as if we're on a permanent adventure. And then that brings us into one other question, which is, well then, what is reality? And to all intents and purposes, if we are sense-bound, that means if our world, our environment, is entirely taken as what it is, and the reason why we take it like that is because the mind is so occupied. We haven't got time to think of all these other things. The other aspect why we don't want to think about it is not a pleasant thing to dwell on. You ask anybody, okay, instead of giving a talk today, we're going to ask you to imagine your own death. Now, it's a Buddhist exercise, actually, a very valuable one, because it jolts us back into a kind of focus, a visual focus of the reality that it will happen to all of us. Now, one of the most beautiful Upanishads that we have, Katha Upanishad. Katha means telling a story. We know it begins with Nachiketa. But he's having an interview with death, who should know all the answers. If you want to know anything about death, then you ask death itself. And although it's a story, we can take it like this. We are questioning the whole principle of death, the whole phenomena of death. And if we observe nature properly, we won't find such a thing. The beauty about the 4 seasons in the Western world, and other places, of course, in India, for example, there are not 4 seasons, there are 5 seasons, because monsoon is included. And we naturally see the differences, the changes. We know it's related to the sun. We know it's related to somehow the movement of the earth. But the key observation is there's a value and beauty in all the seasons, and all of them are related to food. In other words, agricultural production. So we know that nothing much can grow in the winter, so we have to store things. We know that spring is a new growth in a way. And we can celebrate that. It gives us a kind of hope of something that is not cold, something that is warm, something that is inviting. So in the Western world, many holidays are there. I should say in the Northern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, of course, it's the reverse. Places like Southern Africa, Australia, South America, then, of course, the winter in the Northern Hemisphere is the summer in the Southern Hemisphere. In any event, we want warmth, we want shelter, we want all these things. If you're in a very hot climate, you'll be fed up with warmth, maybe, because it's not just warm, it's hot. So the question of birth, life, and death is a fundamental question. And so I suppose our religion has that foundation. Now, in the series of lectures compiled at Jnana Yoga, Swami Vivekananda has a talk that was delivered in London, significantly called The Real Nature of Man. And every religion will incorporate in that what is the reality in man, of man, associated with man, and that includes what happens after death. And significantly, the Katha Upanishad, the third question, because he's being interviewed by death, and the question is very significant. It says, and it can be taken in several different ways. So this is Yayam Pret Vichikitsa Manushe Stitya Eka Nayam Astiti Cheka. There is this doubt, he says. The wonderful doubt. Doubt by whom? Doubt by all of us. You can take it that way. In regard to a man who has departed, that means death. Some holding that he is and some that he is not. You can see this age-old question. And as long as a human exists, that question exists also. And Swami Vivekananda in his lecture brings that question up. He starts off with that and makes a remarkable statement. The foundation of religion is around this whole idea of death. And the key is in the title. So, I would be instructed by thee in this knowledge of all the wishes, of all the generous gifts that you can give me, O death. This is the third thing I'm asking. Don't forget, the first thing was his father has kind of given him a curse. He's sent him off to death. And I'm sure any father would regret that when he sees the absence of his son. In other words, he's probably seeing a death. What is death? The absence of a person. Now, it's not the absence of a corpse. It's the absence of the life within the corpse. What happens to that life is his question. Now, he's not assuming necessarily that this is to do with any ordinary person, but we could take it like that as a general question, because he's saying his problem is about the condition actually of the liberated soul, because his previous request indicated that there is a continuation of life after death. And so that's really what his question, what happens to the liberated soul? In fact, Madhva, the great dualist, will say that preti means mukti, that is, the liberated condition. And doubts about the future of the liberated being you can see are not peculiar to this age or that age or any other age. So you can take it like that, but there is another way of taking it, and that is a general concern. The one who is liberated from the liberations or limitations of name and form, says a commentator, who has become one with the all, cannot be said to exist in the ordinary sense, not limited to a particular consciousness, nor can he be said to be non-existent. And the question also repeatedly put to the Buddha is, does the Tathagata, that means the liberated soul, survive after death, or does he not survive? Now, the idea of Tathagata is a northern Buddhist idea, and I'll explain what that means. Anyway, what is the Buddha's response? He refuses to answer this question, holding that to say that he continues to exist would give rise to one kind of misunderstanding, while to deny it would lead to others. He avoids the question. Now, significantly, Yam, the god of death, the deity of death, does the same. And we'll see significantly, Buddha, in his meditation that leads to enlightenment, is tempted by Mara. Mara is the evil one. We can personalize it like that, anthropomorphize it. But we see the same thing in the life of Jesus. Jesus gets tempted by the adversary, Satan. The difference here is that Yam diverts his attention and says, don't ask this question, it's an awkward question. It's the most outstanding, significant question. And even deities, that is people or persons or souls that live in different realms or different parallel universes, they don't even dare to ask this question, and they don't know. So I tell you what, why don't I give you an increase in material goods? Why don't I give you all the wealth in the world? Why don't I give you a whole kingdom to rule? Why don't I give you a sense of immortality? Why don't I satisfy all your senses with all the pleasures that anything can be given, because, I have the capacity, the power to do it. So he does that. And then whatever desires are hard to attain in this world, I can give it to you. That's his basic answer. Now let's move on. But Nachiketa is very, very persistent, because he realizes the ephemeral nature of all of these things. And he's portraying the human aspiration to reach the eternal as the goal of the truest, most satisfying question. And it is a question that, given the right answer, will save you from all the ills that accompany the experience in this world, sense-bound world. So the Buddhist view that everything that exists is fleeting and evanescence, that gets suggested by Nachiketa himself. That's one of the foundations of Buddhism. Life is a flux. It's a fleeting thing. It comes and goes. Can you notice it? Or do you simply accept it as a norm and try to work within a framework of this second, the next second, have anxiety about the future, have regret about the past? You want to do it like that. We don't take time as an instrumental framework. We don't take space as an instrumental framework within which we can practically operate. We take it in a serious way. So we cannot be contented, really, at the end of the day, if we realize the ephemeral nature of existence itself, in other words, our existence. And when people speak about the real world, you see, you're living in a kind of ephemeral place. You're a spiritual person. Yeah, that's all airy-fairy kind of stuff. It has nothing to do with reality. You can see where their interpretation of the world lies. And I'm sure many of us will use those kinds of phrases. Yes, but in the real world. Somebody has a problem. Suggest a good solution. They say, yeah, but in the real world. And my point of view is what's real about it. Now we are duped into understanding that this is our reality. I've recently been having a look at the wonderful text in Greek, the Philokalia it's called. It means the love of the highest, the most beautiful. It's a kind of writings accumulated by saints, from saints, over a period of time, from about, let's say, the 5th century, right up to about the 15th century, some say even beyond. And the idea is to give you some practical guidance in the reality of spirituality. It inevitably involves psychology. That means you have to take spiritual life as trying to understand the format, the shape, the control, and the positive nature and possibility of the mind. Now, different terms are used in these translations. So we can see there's a question that arises, or a subject, which is on guarding the intellect. Intellect means mind. We can say, why do they use the term intellect in the translation? We have this translation, buddhi. What is buddha? One of enlightened buddhi, intellect. Well, at the end of the day, Nachiketa gets his answer, which is not direct. It says there are two ways of thinking. And you can see the two different paths or possibilities of thinking, of moving the attention. And one will produce, maybe not so naturally, will produce a fulfillment ultimately. And the other one will produce only misery, even though it may not look like it. There's a passage here, on guarding the intellect. It comprises some 27 texts, and because all these talks are in, or the writings are in chronological order, you can see this is one of the earliest texts. And so here it is. A very peculiar approach. It says, there is among the passions an anger of the intellect, the mind. And this anger is in accordance with nature. Saying we automatically get angry over many, many things. Can we use it? Without anger, he says, a man cannot attain purity. Very interesting approach. He has to feel angry with what? With all that is sown in him by the enemy. It's another way of saying he has to feel a kind of discomfort, a reaction to all the things which are essentially giving him misery, yet he misunderstands it, misinterprets it as something that is good. Then he says, when Job, he's referring to the biblical Job, felt this anger, he reviled his enemies, calling them dishonorable, men of no repute, lacking everything good, whom I would not consider fit to live with the dogs that guard my flocks. He's making a quotation, biblical quotation. He who wishes to acquire the anger that is in accordance with nature must uproot all self-will. Self-will means egoism. Until he establishes within himself the state natural to the intellect. Natural to the intellect, a state of enlightened buddhi, we can add. Then he says, if you find yourself hating your fellow men and resist this hatred, and you see that it grows weak and withdraws, don't rejoice in your heart. Don't be satisfied with a small victory. There's no way for relaxation. In spiritual life, there's no holiday. For this withdrawal is a trick of the evil spirits. It means the reactions. When Buddha sits down and gets tempted by Mara Mara is the evil one. When Jesus sits and has a conversation with the adversary, with Satan, Satan is tempting him. Now, this is not something from outside that is tempting you. This is your internal reaction to what is presented, interpreting as, yes, that seems nice. That seems good. I should do that. But a more seasoned person, maybe even with a little bit of maturity, will say, actually, that has no value for me, that is no good. When we do the Enneagram, we lost the second part of it. We provide questions based on rationale. Because if you don't challenge your behavior, then you have no hope of changing it. Why am I doing this? Why am I saying that? Not with a sense of guilt or remorse. That a little bit of that should be there, no doubt. But with an attitude of, well, what is my strategy to change it? If it's not reasonably doing me any good, why don't I change it? That's the point. So these evil things are preparing a second attack worse than the first. They have left their troops behind the city, we're comparing it to a kind of warfare, and ordered them to remain there. If you go out to attack them, they will flee before you in weakness. But if your heart is then elated because you have driven them away, in other words, you have suitably controlled the mind, controlled the urges which are not that useful to you, and you leave the city, some of them will attack you from the rear. In other words, in a subtle way. Subtly settled in the unconscious mind, these things are there. And then he says, while the rest will stand their ground in front of you, and your wretched soul will be caught between them, with no means of escape. Now he says, what is the city? The city is prayer. Resistance is rebuttal. And rebuttal through, in his case, is saying, Christ Jesus. In other people, we can say through cosmic mind. The foundation is incensive power. That's what he's saying. So he's saying, let us stand firm now. Throughout all the religious texts, we can see this one theme, fix your mind. Now, Buddha is saying, in very simple terms, just to remind you, his simple principles, and why those principles are so simple in a foundational way that they're popular. In one hand, he's saying, taking a medical approach, well, there is pain. He's not asking where does this pain come from. He's not analyzing that. He's not saying specifically where it's coming from. He's saying generally, this comes from, secondly, a lack of fulfillment. It comes from desire. I have a desire for this or that, and it's all within the so-called real world. But he very clearly says this world is a flux. And the third thing is, it is possible to overcome this. It's possible to overcome the pain because it's possible to overcome the attention going outwards, seeking a sense of fulfillment, what we call desires. And then fourthly, I'm not going to just tell you the principles, I'm going to tell you the practice. The fourth principle is an eightfold path. Now you have a separate two hands being showed, 8 things. 4 things, 8 remedies. Now, not quite as simple as that, because in practicing these things, you can break that down, and that gives a wide range of commentaries. And what Buddha taught was a broad church in a way, a kind of narrow way on the one hand, but broadened out by another school of Buddhism which says there is a broad way suitable for everybody, not just suitable for those who sit and interpret the teaching as meditation. Buddhism, therefore, has a wide scope to everyone, and don't think it's simple because there are probably as many sects within Buddhism as there are within Christianity. Because you can say if Buddha is an eternal condition, then we can get a different revelation even now. So there are some schools of Buddhism that have very, very modern revelations, maybe a couple of 100 years old, and say, yes, it came from the Buddha, because the Buddha is an eternal reality. Now, in the rebuttal to Buddhist kind of thought, we find it in what is called the Vedanta Sutras or the Brahma Sutras. And there, several ideas of Buddhism are presented, several approaches, different approaches. There are the nihilist Buddhists, which says that actually nothing exists and nothing comes from nothing, and so that's it. You can take that approach. Another school would be idealistic school, which says this world is ephemeral, but what is a little bit more real will be ideas, the world of idealism. And another one will say this world is real, but it is a flux. All of these agree that this world is transient. First one will say it's transient is something like an illusion. When you dispel the illusion, there's a nothingness. And then the next person will say, yes, it's a world of ideals or ideas, something like Kantian ideology, transcendental idealism, that kind of thing. And so, but even that's ephemeral. But that's more of a reality. And the other one will say, well, this seems to be real, but it is full of change and flux. In other words, it's also saying, in a sense, it's unreal. All of them are saying it. Now, the Brahma Sutras tackles the question and says, this is why you are wrong. Because Vedanta says something does exist. It is not all a flux. There is something there that is permanent. Now, Buddha is saying the same thing. It's just misunderstood. So when a term like emptiness is applied, shunya, when we really analyze the schools of thought that use this, they're really not talking about nothing. They're not talking about emptiness. They're talking about the fact that you cannot describe such a thing. This is why Yama is reluctant to answer the question that Nachiketa has posed. Because how will you describe something that is not objectively in front of us, that cannot be analyzed? How can you, in any event, describe that which is transcendent? You can't do it. And even on the idealistic level, you can't describe what a dream is. You can't describe what a feeling of love is, the emotional level. You know what it means, but how will you measure it? Who will give you a cup of love, or a cup of resentment, or a cup of sadness, or a cup of depression? These are all experiences that are not measurable. And the physical world, scientific world, only deals with data that is measurable. When it ceases to be measurable, even science goes into metaphysics and speculation. So, not to go into that in any way, which might be confusing, but I'll give you the example of how things are ephemeral even in the science world. The current model of cosmology tells us that something like about 70% of what is called matter is a kind of peculiar energy called dark energy. There's something also called dark matter, don't worry about it. Dark energy because it's another way of saying we don't know what it is, but we can speculate. And where does it come from? It comes from an analysis of what is called 1A supernova. That means we look at something and we see two different things, that is, stars collapsing, will have the same kind of brightness. And from that, you can determine how far away they are. And from that, you can determine how fast the expansion of the universe is moving. And if you accept that there's an origin called a Big Bang somewhere, it should not be moving that fast. It should be slowing down. But for 5 billion years, it's been speeding up, was their conclusion. And in 2000 and the early, I think it was 2010 or something, 3 people who were involved in this measurement got a Nobel Prize. In 2014, this data was republished, and with a new technology and with better observation and more data and so on for all of these kinds of things, and by doing the recalculations which don't put a bias toward a model, or all of these kinds of things, very carefully approached and from different points of view, it seems as if all the measurements were taken in one direction, and that we're caught in a kind of void in the universe which creates a bulk flow. In other words, we're all moving. All the measurements were taken only in one direction, assuming that all directions are the same. And the more we look at the universe, we see, no, all directions are not the same. It should all even out. See, like looking at a picture and seeing, okay, there are these different pixels, we can't figure it out, it's all clumpy. But as we look further and deeper, it'll all smooth out. It'll all become one picture. That's not what we see. What we see is clumpiness emphasized more and more. And at 10 billion light years away, it doesn't smooth out even. And so maybe the Nobel Committee made a little bit of an error, because when you see what is the reliability of the interpretation and so on, even though it was done so well according to the data available, it doesn't really, the doubt is there. It's not as certain as particle physics, where you have to have a certainty, what's called 5 sigma certainty. It comes down to about 2. And not even cosmologists will say, yes, that's a good result. Anyway, a long story short, what is I saying? I'm saying that what we see and our interpretation of what we see is changing. And so when we don't have all the information, then we jump to an assumption. Do we have all the information about the world? No, we don't. When we say there's a totality, we don't understand what's a totality, because there are things within it which we cannot measure. It's as simple as that. We cannot measure them. And when we do measure them, we have to take into account all kinds of different angles, take everything into account. When it comes to the spiritual world, it's not an objective world. And for that reason, Buddha remains quiet, and therefore subject to interpretation. So there are various schools of Buddhism, but when we talk about shunya, emptiness, we are not talking about nothing. We're simply talking about nothing that cannot be measured, something that cannot be measured, put it that way. And Vedanta says it's not a nothing, it's an everything, it's a totality. Just a difference of emphasis. So we have to acknowledge that Buddhism, spreading throughout the Western world, actually spreading throughout the Middle Eastern world and the Western world ultimately, is a great, great champion of the Vedanta. Because when it comes down to the essentials, there's no significant difference. That's the final conclusion we can come to. But why is it more popular? It's because it's deemed as a philosophy, not as a religion. Now, when we talk about Hinduism, people immediately have the idea of thousands and thousands of gods and goddesses. Even when we talk to Hindus, that's the same. But I have to point out that if we are to spread this message of Vedanta, it has to be applicable to all people in all circumstances. And that is why Vivekananda says our aim is to make a Christian a better Christian, a Buddhist a better Buddhist, a Hindu a better Hindu, a Muslim a better Hindu, Muslim, and so on, like that. We can also say a scientific humanist a better humanist. Then you'll have appeal to just about everybody you can think of. Other than those people who are quite happy to go along from day to day and not get involved in all those things and leave death as a poor relative at the end. And when they reach retirement age, maybe they start thinking about these things because they see friends and companions start getting ill and disappearing one by one. And then maybe it'll occur to you, I see my tunnel is getting narrower, and maybe it'll close completely into a sense of darkness called death. But never mind, deal with it when it happens. Religion is not like that. It starts off with this inquiry. And it is Nachiketa's question. Some say this and some say that. What's the real answer? This is the great concern. The Vivekananda says, religion begins with this question and ends with this answer. That's a significant thing. Now, how many deities are there in Hinduism? This question is also asked, not just the term Hindu doesn't arise in the Upanishads, but the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has this question in a conversation between other wise people and a great sage called Yajnavalkya. The funny story is in Janaka's court, and Janaka has an assembly of wise people, has cows, which equals wealth, to distribute, and he's prepared to distribute it along with provision for old age and the cows. Come on, I'll give it to the wisest person. Yajnavalkya looks around and he says to his disciples, hey, come on, take the cows, please. And just as they're doing, there's a big uproar, naturally. What, you say you're the wisest? Well, it's not the sign of wisdom to say, yes, I'm the wisest, I'm taking the cows. He answers very nicely, very diplomatically, well, if you think that I'm not the wisest, then prove it. And so it begins a series of questions. He answers everyone on point. One of the questions are, how many are the deities? Now, what we mean by deities, Sanskrit word is deva. Deva means an illuminating factor, a shining light. When you have the festival of Diwali, it's a festival of lights, not the festival of gods or goddesses. So there's a different interpretation, unfortunately, in this. But there's also the understanding that somebody who leads a good life and so on, pure life, can go on to another realm, let us say from our point of view in this afterlife, and goes and takes command of various universal subtle forces and functions. There's that concept also. So we have the devas in the sense of those entities, spirits in a different dimension, parallel universe or whatever it is, and working along there. That's a perfectly reasonable thing. We can't prove it or disprove it, but there it is. You can take it in the sense of the natural forces themselves. Philosophically, these are called Tanmatras, and there are only 5 of them identified. Modern science has identified a 6th, which is nuclear forces. But the old scientists of old had figured it all out. It said, yes, there is something like a field within which there are different subtle wavelengths standing in potentiality. Again, if you like, you call it potential energy. And then there's kinetic energy, and then there's radiational energy, and then there's electrical energy and magnetic energy. And modern science has nicely combined the electrical and magnetic forces into one electromagnetism. The ancient scientists knew all of this. And all of these really are deemed devas. So there's that interpretation. And Yajnavalkya answers a standard answer, and he gives a figure. But that figure gets reduced, without going into it all, that figure gets reduced into 33. Then the question is, what was the other thousands and thousands? Oh, no, these are just different variations. These are manifestations. Okay. 33 gods. Which are these? Now, if you look at it properly, and I've been through it in great detail with a number of you at different stages, that's reduced essentially into space, time, and you find causation and so on, and you find ultimately the Buddha not spoken of in this way, but you'll find a cosmic mind, a creative mind. And you can go even beyond that and say there's only one. So a long conversation goes from thousands, maybe millions, down to essentially 6 and 3 and 2 and 2.5 and 1 and 1.5 and 1 eventually. Monotheism, in other words, more than that, monism. Monism is the equivalent of shunya, emptiness. It's empty of everything else in the relative world. That's what its true meaning is. Buddha avoided all these questions not to get into metaphysical arguments. Is there a God? Some say there is, some say there's not. Buddha kept quiet on the subject. Find it out for yourself. Here's an Eightfold Path. Why don't you take it and go on a self-discovery course? A truly scientific approach. If somebody has a hypothesis about it, that's fine. Here's a methodology. Do the methodology called Eightfold Path, and ultimately you'll realize what's at the end. But what's at the end is indescribable. But Buddha didn't say there was nothing, because the very fact that he went from Gautama Siddhartha, his name, a seeking person, to one of enlightened intellect means there was a positive transformation. That's not a nothingness. His own experience showed there was some transformation. All he's saying is it's indescribable. Now, when we teach Vedanta, we're not talking about the ritualism of Hinduism. Although it is the basis of Hinduism, we have to acknowledge it's also the basis of Christianity. It's also the basis of humanity. It's the basis of our own existence. It is the truth. And investigating the truth is what is called spiritual practice or religion. But the central question really is around this death. And just to make sure that we are not misquoting, we can see what Vivekananda himself has to say on the subject. He says, what is beyond? He asks a question. What is real? But so long as death remains, all these attempts at suppressing these questions will always prove to be unsuccessful. We may talk about seeing nothing beyond and keeping all our hopes and aspirations confined to the present moment, and struggle hard not to think of anything beyond the world of senses. And perhaps everything outside helps to keep us limited within its narrow bounds. The whole world may combine to prevent us from broadening out beyond the present. Yet so long as there is death, the question must come again and again, is death the end of all these things to which we are clinging? As if they were the most real of all realities, the most substantial of all substances, the world vanishes in a moment and is gone. Standing on the brink of a precipice beyond which is the infinite yawning chasm, every mind, however hardened, is bound to recoil and ask, is this real? The hopes of a lifetime built up little by little with all the energies of a great mind vanish in a second. Are they real? And this question he's going to answer. The question must be answered, he says. Time never lessens its power. On the other hand, it adds strength to it. Then there is the desire to be happy. We run after everything to make ourselves happy. He says, we pursue our mad career in the external world of the senses. If you ask the young man with whom life is successful, he will declare that it is real. And he really thinks so. Perhaps when the same man grows old and finds fortune ever eluding him, he will then declare that it is fate. He finds at last that his desires cannot be fulfilled. Wherever he goes, there is an adamantine wall beyond which he cannot pass. Everything is evanescent. Enjoyment, misery, luxury, wealth, power, and poverty, even life itself, are all evanescent. You have an experience of evanescence when you take a soft drink, carbonated drink, and you see the evanescence, you see. But that soon disappears. All the bubbles come up and all the bubbles disappear. And then he's saying something like this, just an extract. He's saying, two positions remain to mankind. One is to believe with the nihilists that all is nothing, that we know nothing, that we can never know anything, either about the future, the past, or even the present. For we must remember that he who denies the past and the future and wants to stick to the present is simply a madman. One may as well deny the father and mother and assert the child. It would be equally logical. To deny the past and future, the present must inevitably also be denied. The present must inevitably be denied. This is one position, and that of the nihilists. I have never seen a man who could really become a nihilist, he says. For 1 minute, not even for a minute. It's very easy to talk. Then there's another position, to seek for an explanation, to seek for the real, to discover in the midst of this eternally changing and evanescent world whatever is real. What was Buddha doing? Buddha was seeking what is real. In this body, which is an aggregate of molecules of matter, is there anything which is real? This has been the search throughout the history of the human mind. And in the very oldest times, we often find glimpses of light coming into men's minds. We find man, even then, going a step beyond this body, finding something which is not this external body, although very much like it, much more complete, much more perfect, and which remains even when this body is dissolved. We read in the hymns of the Rig Veda, addressed to the god of fire who is burning a dead body, "Carry him, O fire, in your arms gently. Give him a perfect body, a bright body. Carry him where the fathers live, where there is no more sorrow, where there is no more death." The same idea you will find present in every religion. And we get another idea with it. It is a significant fact that all religions, without one exception, hold that man is a degeneration of what he was. Whether they clothe this in mythological words, or in the clear language of philosophy, or the beautiful expressions of poetry. And so it goes on. It's worth reading that entire thing, The Real Nature of Man. We won't have time to read that all. Now, coming to the Hindu concept of what we might call pluralism, what has been described by others as polytheism. Is one of my great battles in favor of Hinduism, to replace this word polytheism and the concept of polytheism by the word pluralism. Not so many gods, but so many ways. Now, the form that these deities take has shifted over thousands of years. So the modern variety, depending on the expression of art of the current era, will come up with many visual aspects of something that cannot be objectively seen or identified. Who has seen God? There was one example I gave in a place called Kilkenny to people who were supposed to be Advaitins, non-dualists. And I was describing how Sri Ramakrishna's desire to see Mother Kali culminated in a vision. And they said, it's just a hallucination. I said, no, you don't understand. Before him was a sculptured image of Kali. Before that, he's praying, because he knows that it is not the clay image or whatever it's made of, the basalt image, that is Kali. It is simply more than just a reminder. It is infused, because if the ultimate God is everywhere present, must also be there. And he helps us to think of something. And not just the being which is there, that is represented as a stone image, but the qualities: motherliness, protection against our enemies. Enemies means not somebody who put poison in my tea, but the enemy means within my own psyche, my own mind. These are the enemies. I'll mention some of them: jealousy, fear, doubt, desires. These are our enemies. And they masquerade as friends, or they masquerade as puzzlements, in which case we have to take a book or a consultant or something. Please, can you analyze this for me and make me better? The analysis itself is assumed to make me better. Well, we're saying no. We shouldn't entertain their company. We should allow them to come, as I mentioned many times. Allow them to come, give them a certain allocated time. Really, come and sit down, have a cup of tea, because I recognize you as playmates of my past. When I was 4 or 5 years old and I was frustrated, then I stamped and I cried and I made a loud wailing noise and so on. And all of this, that was suitable behavior when I was small. But is it suitable behavior now? No. Well, then when it comes up, I see, yes, this is my feeling. Although I don't stamp and cry and exhibit my frustration, still I recognize how it was, and internally I feel it. Let it come, let it go. What's the basis of it? The basis of it is my wrong assumption that I'm an individual struggling. And how should I replace it? With better thoughts, introducing noble qualities of strength and beauty and goodness and love. And when we, as the Vedas have done, when we invoke Agni, for example, fire, we are actually invoking the quality of enlightenment, strength, continuation, goodness, power. All of these things are there when we look at the fire. Sustaining, you can cook with fire, and all these other qualities are there. The fire being one of the most significant discoveries for man. So when we talk of a quality internally, when we evoke qualities, we're allowing every single molecular structure in the body to vibrate with those qualities, including the brain structure, the neurology, and also we're tapping into something that is immeasurable. What do we mean by strength? We don't know. We only know strong things. And so every quality has to come with an objective thing. When we talk of love, we don't know what is love. We have no quantitative description of it, except we know what love means and how it's exhibited. It's exhibited in pouring generosity, pouring unconditionally everywhere. Being the recipient of that, we feel loved. And so by replacing these old things with new things, and with no holiday for it, continuing doing this. And in this Eastern text that I quoted, there is this idea, you see, because the whole mystical idea of mystical practice, mystical conclusion will be a unity of experience, a mystic union, but it will be accompanied by this one discipline of fixing the mind on the Supreme. And we use any device that we can grasp. And that requires maybe making a form, an internal image. And so we should not think that all these images that are constructed have not come from the root of meditation. So we have images such as Ganesha, we have images such as Saraswati, and when we explore the symbolism of them, they become the object of meditation, which brings us back to the original meditator. Even Hindus may suspect that different forms of one deity will be viewed as something separate, and we can only pray to that to get a certain result. That would be also an error. There would be a kind of idolatry in a sense. But when the Hindu prays to one form, they're praying to the ultimate Brahman. That much they know. They are praying to a unity. There are no separate things. Even the basis of a triune deity such as Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva will just be three aspects, three facets of one thing. And this is why Yajnavalkya tells us these are all facets, they're all manifestations, fragmentations of one existence. Now, supposing culturally it doesn't appeal to us. Well, there are other forms. Jesus, and there are a form of a spirit as a kind of dove, a paraclete. Here you go to the Vatican and you'll see, go to the Sistine Chapel, you'll see all these various concepts and forms. You'll see God the Father with outstretched hand toward Adam, viewed as a kind of universal fatherly figure. If you ask a Muslim who says, I don't believe in any of these forms, all right, then when you say Allah, what comes to mind? And the person may answer, if they answer truthfully, a kind of cloud or an atmosphere or a sky or the sea or something like that. Some concept will come. And we know there are qualities, even though it's denied. Yes, the all-merciful, for example, the all-compassionate, the all-merciful. Are these not qualities that we recognize in humanity? If we ask the Jewish person, you also don't have a concept except one of a father. And because we have, for years and years and thousands of years, the patriarchal system, we can easily identify, oh, there's a father, yes, okay. Then what does he look like? Don't ask that question. He has no visibility thing. Then what do we think of? We think of Ruach, a spirit, breathing over the waters. Or we think of an entity, a kind of cloud on an ark of a covenant with two winged angels. Some image is there. So the Occidental mind inevitably, as well as the Oriental mind inevitably, will accept the principle of image making. And you can't say it's not there in the Christian church, the mainstream churches of Catholicism, whether it's Eastern or Western, many, many statues and so on. And where did the idea of statuary come from? It comes from the idea that Christianity cannot develop unless it integrated with cultural Romanism. In other words, when Roman culture seemed to diminish in terms of administrative structures, Christianity takes over. It is said that possibly Constantine, the emperor, turned to Christianity because the Roman culture was monotheism. In other words, you have a state religion. You can have many, many different religions and concepts if you like. But the idea of having one deity, even in a city or in an empire, is naturally making a cohesion. So when Christianity develops and becomes more and more popular because the leaders are taking over administrative posts. And so one great administrative post was a commercial post where bishops or a bishop controlled the grain supply in Egypt. And without that grain supply, Roman society cannot exist. It was hugely valuable. Constantine, being an emperor, says, well, I have to make friends with the person controlling the grain supply. and he happens to be a Christian bishop. Then as time goes on, all the clergy take over the administrative positions that normally or formerly belonged to the Western Roman Empire. Even the word basilica, people say it's a huge church and so on. Well, the original word basilica meant a magistrate's court, Roman magistrate's court. And so when we take over these administrative buildings and so on and so forth, Christianity now starts taking an administrative shape to its advantage and becomes a national religion of the Roman world. That's how it develops. We have to use many, many devices to contact that which is not subject to seeing whether it is alkaline, acid, seeing whether it is tangibly real, and so on and so forth. We have to take one thing from Vedanta. Everything is Brahman. And we have to understand that this whole purpose of Vivekananda's lecture was to say, we have to evaluate what is real. This is called discernment. His own monastic name, Vivekananda. You have the bliss of discernment. And to see what is real, what is unreal, as it applies to birth, life, and death, and particularly death, he's saying, suggestion, just as Nachiketa is doing. And then from that evaluation, we get, well, what is real then? Is it a nothing or a something? And we come to a conclusion, not only is it a something, it is everything. That we have to rehearse time and time again. Well, I think we said enough on the subject, so I'm going to leave it there. And I hope I've at least touched on, supplied some kind of basic answer to your questions.
Thank you, Swamiji. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Very beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Okay. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, 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 brother.